tonight we're going to talk about socks. So I'm just going to ramble for a few minutes because I know some people know this was scheduled. I announced it ahead of time. And I'll talk for a few minutes just about this and that. And then I'm going to show you some socks that I have from different countries in the Middle East. This is the book that we're reading. Ethnic Socks and Stockings by Priscilla Gibson Roberts. And it's really the only book that I know of that has information about socks from the Middle East and techniques on how to make them. And it's full of all kinds of pictures and charts and instructions. So we'll talk about this a little bit as we go through the talk tonight. But I want to show you also socks that I own that are made like some of the socks in this. This book, Ethnic Socks and Stockings, I don't know how many of you have started reading it already, but it's really interesting. You know, it's got an introduction and some information about the parts of the world where these socks are made. And then it's got a bunch of techniques, but it doesn't actually have any patterns. So when you go through into the sections later, you'll see as you read it, it shows you the general shapes of the socks that are made in the Middle East and the way the patterns are arranged on them. And how the color work is done or what might be done with different patternings. It's very interesting information, but I don't think it's put together in the most friendly way. Then we have the section that shows you the socks, and we'll go through a bunch of these, and I'll show you, for example, this one, and one that I have that's very much like it, and I'll come back and I'll go over the details. So it has generic instructions about how they're made, but no actual patterns. So there's a bunch of those, and then there's another section about the techniques that shows you how to make different heels and toes, but again there's no whole patterns, so this is very odd. It's very much like an encyclopedia or reference book, so you can see here it would tell you how to do a different kind of cast on or how to set up the needles for starting a sock, and things like different kind of toe shapes, and we're going to go over a few of these on the samples that I have here tonight. And then in the back she's got some sort of patterns. Again, there are still sort of patterns, but she's made up some of her own sock designs and given you, again, generic kind of instructions on how to make them. But everything's charted and the techniques are in there. The thing is, you kind of have to go through and make your own pattern for each one, because you have to find the sock, you find the charts, then you have to look in her basic instructions and say, oh, what kind of cast on is used, and what kind of shaping for the toe, and what kind of heel is worked, and all of that. So it's not in a very straightforward way for a beginning knitter to just take a pattern, follow it step by step. It doesn't have that. So I someday hope someone will write another book, because it's been out for quite some time. It's from the 80s, I think, or maybe the 90s. Can't even find the copyright date on it, but it's been out for, you know, several decades. And it would be really nice, 1995, it would be really nice to have a new book with some updates. Another thing that's could be updated from this is all the samples in this book are in museums in North America, like in the US and Canada. And it would be really cool to get samples or to go places and get photos of socks that people have in their personal collections or in museums in the Middle East. And I know that's not an easy place to visit, probably harder now than it has been for a long time. But it's a project I might do before I die, or I'm happy to get someone else going on it. I think it would be really cool to have this information because it's just not available in English. So, I said I've got all these socks that I want to show you, and I'm going to try to match them up to some of the socks that are in this book. And we'll look at how they're cast on and how they're shaped and just some of the details that makes them interesting. So this sock's from Iran or Afghanistan. so Persia or Afghanistan. So definitely in the Middle East, could be in the Arab country or not. Because Persia, you know, is not an Arab country. They speak a different language there, Farsi, and not Arabic, and lots of different culture and history. So something to know. But this is the sock that I have that I believe is from that same area. You can see it's got, like the one that we are knitting, if you're doing the advanced one, it has a very complicated pattern on the top of the foot and on the bottom of the foot. And then in this case, it gets simpler on the leg, and this is what I based our pattern on. See, it's got these little flower motifs and then these zigzag motifs. So you've got this all-over pattern on the foot, but then a kind of stripe pattern on the leg. One thing you can see here that I change is if you look in these patterns, you have 3, 4, 5 colors in a row. And I set up our pattern so it only has 2 colors in a row, because most of us can do that. And we get a little nervous with 3 colors in a row, and we probably wouldn't know what to do with 4 or 5 colors in a row. So my friend Baccara sent me this from Switzerland, and she found them in the flea market. There's all kinds of really cool knitted stuff that shows up in the Geneva flea market. So if you're ever there, try to go to it. So she said she wasn't sure. She thinks they're from Turkey or an eastern or northern country. So they could be from Turkey, but they're very much like socks that are made. They very much, to me, look like socks that were probably made in Iran or Afghanistan. So they are toe up. If you hear my cats fighting in the background, you can just ignore that. They've been having some beefs lately. So it's toe up, so it starts right here. And then you increase like we are doing, and then you work even on the foot. You can see how they've got the heel patterning coming all the way down. It is an afterthought heel, which means you leave an opening for the heel and come back later. And they just gathered the stitches together and left a little tail at the tip of the heel instead of doing Kitchener stitch or Russian grafting or something. So that's an interesting thing that you'll see there. And sometimes they start the toe and leave a little tassel on it. So don't weave in all those ends. What I did was I left ends on the top like this for a little tassel. In this case, it's actually to gather in the top of the sock or to wrap around and tie the sock, because there's no shaping in this leg. So it would be made to fit your calf. And then it would be, you know, big around your ankle, and it might fall down because there is no shaping in it for a knee sock, or even if it didn't reach all the way to your knee, to the, you know, widest part of your calf it might reach to. But normally they'd be a knee sock, and you would tie it around your knee. So if you look at this toe, when I hold it up like this, you can see there's that band of 1 stitch of color, and I did 2 stitches. And on this sock, it turns to 2 stitches on the band on the side when you get up further. But that's what I did for the sock in our advanced one, is I have those 2 stitches of color, a little band going around like that. So I want to show you what that looks like on a sock where you can see it better. I've got some samples from different classes that I did on Craftsy and other places that have big stitches and, oh, I thought I had them all here, have big stitches and worsted weight. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so this is not multiple colors in the toe, but I wanted you to see is that you cast on here, and then in this case you can see I wrote out, my tension wasn't quite even, because in this particular one you knit back and forth a few rows, and then you pick up stitches on the side and you make this toe. But what I want to show you is that when you're looking at it, the cast-on would go this way, and then those stitches from the cast-on go up the sides of the sock. And that's just worked by where you put the increases and how you do it. Now, in our sock, we don't make a little rectangle first. We just do Judy's Magic Cast-On, start knitting in both directions, and then we have our increases here. And it's pointier, kind of like this one. This is another Iranian design. I did it from this slipper sock that actually was made in Iran. And you can see the colors really on this. Now this is not knitted in, it's duplicate stitched on, it's embroidered on. And you can tell by looking inside how it's done. Also, the colors don't go all the way around, so it's not done in Fair Isle, not stranded all the way around in this case. This sock, all the colors are stranded all the way around. It's very thin yarn, but it's a very, very thick and stiff sock, and it's not stretchy at all because of all those colors that are stranded inside. So this one is a little stretchier, not as thick because only 2 colors go all the way around. You can see it has a simpler pattern on the sole, and that happens, that's not uncommon either. There'll always be something fancy though, because these were often worn as house shoes. You know, this kind is a slipper sock. It doesn't have any leg at all. And the socks from this part of the world might be like this. They might have a very short cuff, like an ankle slipper sock with a little anklet. They might go up about 4 or 6 inches, or the knee sock. So you can make them, and they're authentic no matter what length you make the leg. So this one's very much like what we're doing because it has that band that goes around the toe like that, but it starts much pointier and that kind of shaping. So there's different ways to do this, and on these slipper socks I did a way where you actually pick up and knit rather than increasing. So you pick up and knit on the side of that band. But in the socks we're doing, to make it a little easier, and I don't think it looks any less beautiful, I did a make one increase. And you can do a backward loop cast on instead of a make one. Normally a make one, I would say, is where you pick up the bar between the stitches and knit into the back of it so it twists. And I actually did a backward loop cast on for my socks because it was too hard and too tight to get in there and pick up those bars in those corners. So you can do that actually when you pick up the bar and twist it, so you knit in the back of it so it's twisted. It comes out exactly the same as if you had done a backward loop cast on. It's just 1 row off, and being 1 row off, having your increases start 1 row later or 1 row earlier and end 1 row later, 1 row earlier, is not going to make a huge amount of difference when you're looking at a whole sock, especially when you're talking about fingering weight. So you can substitute those and anytime you want and you're doing a toe-up sock. The thing is, some people are fussier than others, so I don't bother with make one right and make one left. And you can do it with the right slanting on one side and the left slanting on the other, but it's not something that I can really be bothered with, especially with fingering weight yarn on the toe of a sock that's going to be in a boot or shoe most of the time. So that's just me. So these I got in Canada. I was doing a cruise. I was teaching on a knitting cruise up the east coast of North America, and this was at a farmer's market, and there was a lady there that had these. She had two pairs. This pair, which is, I think it's commercially spun yarn, it's wool, and then these bright colors are just acrylic, definitely commercially spun acrylic yarn embroidered on it. You can see she ran out of the peachy color, so she just switched to green on the back of the heel. And this one is everyone's nightmare of what wool feels like. It's so scratchy and coarse. It's definitely hand spun, and I think it's from some kind of goat. And I thought it was hand spun. This is a very traditional design too, with just a stripe on it. And I thought it was hand spun because looking at the yarn, but the woman who was there, she didn't speak very much English. So I had to go like this, like a drop spindle. I said, hand spun? Is it yarn made? And when I went like this, she was so excited. She shook her head. She knew exactly what I was talking about. So I bought 2 pairs, one of each of the styles that she had. And we're walking away, and then I had to run all the way back across the farmer's market because I forgot to ask her where they were from, because her cousin had made them, she told me. And so we could communicate a little bit, but not to talk about spinning techniques. And I said, where does your cousin live? And she leaned over and she says, Iran. So she was trying to tell me really quietly, but I was very excited to be able to have some socks from that part of the world. So that's one kind of toe and one kind of shaping. sock that I wanted to show you. So I'm going to flip through here, well, just the next page. This is a different design. I want you to see like the toe here. See how it starts with a whole bunch of stitches and it's kind of flat, and then there's all this color work on it. These are from Turkey. There's a couple pairs in the book here that I have that are like that. That starts with a flat toe. Here's another pair from a different part of Turkey, but you can see it still starts with a flat toe. And someone gave me these when I was teaching a class at Stitches or Vogue Knitting Live. I don't remember. Aren't these amazing? They're very traditional kind of patternings from the Middle East. I don't know. I think they're probably from Turkey because of the flat toe, also because of some of the combination of the stripes, vertical and horizontal patterns, but I'm not sure. They have a very plain bottom, still using the two colors all the way around, but you can see they used a solid row where they made the heel opening, because this is also an afterthought heel. So it's much easier to pick up the stitches and get started with the heel if you're in a solid row, and I did that on the socks that we're making. And this knitter did it, and you can tell because here it looks like it's part of the design. There's some solid rows in it, but on the sole with the little just salt and pepper or AB, it stands out where she has that solid row. So started with a bunch of stitches. Could start with Judy's Magic Cast On like we did, and then increased some, then the foot's even. And you'll notice that this one gets a little fatter after the foot. This is made out of cotton. Again, with color work, it's not stretchy. Cotton's not stretchy anyway. Why would the leg be bigger than the foot is because you have to fit the leg over your heel. You have to be able to pull it up on your calf. And that is bigger than the rest of your foot. And since it's not stretchy, it has to be really big compared to the size of the foot. So this is very unusual. You don't see that in our patterns a lot because we usually have stretchy fabric in the sock, and usually we have the patterns. I'm not sure I've ever seen a pattern that didn't have the same number of stitches in the ankle and the foot. That's just the way sock patterns are written today. So that's a really interesting one. It also has a little tie up here. It's not a drawstring or anything though. They just tied the ends. They didn't do any weaving in on those last ends. They just tied them off and left it like a little tassel. So things come to me and I'm very happy. I love to have them and I love to be able to share them, and I want to write a pattern for something like this. I haven't thought of how to do it yet because I don't want to do that part where it gets fatter. After the leg, I want to be able to add some shaping to it. But I also love how they have that one motif and then the outlined with the different patterns as the increases go, and then that's repeated as an overall repeat motif on the leg. So I like the way this design is. So that is a Turkish sock. So how might you do that? Well, I have a sock that's like that. This is what you might see in a lot of toe-up sock patterns. It's kind of considered a normal wedge toe. It's not as flat as that Turkish sock because we'll say that one might have started with 2 inches wide of stitches, so maybe 12, 14 stitches. This starts with 6 or 7 stitches across. But you see how the stitches are? This is the stitches in between the increases, but the cast on goes this way. So Priscilla Gibson Roberts calls these vertical and horizontal cast-ons in the book. So if you see that, one means the cast-on lines up with the top and bottom of the foot. The other means the cast-on lines up with that band that goes up the sides of the foot. And the only difference is how you set it up in that very first couple rounds. So again, I would use Judy's Magic Cast On for this. I didn't. These are samples from my Craftsy classes. I did not use Judy's Magic Cast On in my Craftsy classes because I didn't know how to do it yet. And it's not in Priscilla's book because Judy hadn't invented it yet. So what's the difference between Judy's Magic Cast On and the ones in this book, and that you might know, like Turkish cast on you might see, or wrap cast on, or figure eight cast on? Well, with those wrap cast on, figure eight cast on, you're just wrapping the yarn around the needle. You're not making any real stitches. It's just yarn being wrapped around the needles, about 2 double points. It was traditionally, you might use 2 circular needles now. And then when you knit the first row, that's when the stitches get locked in place. So it can be quite difficult to knit the first round because you just have these loose loops of yarn on the needles. It's very easy to wrap it around the needles, but then it's really hard to knit the first row and get tension. You have to then tighten it up manually a lot of times. Now, I don't think that these knitters have a problem with it when you look at some of the things that they've done, but they've probably been doing it their whole life and making the same kind of things over and over again. You know, for us, it's a new thing. You know, we like to have new techniques and try new styles and ways to do things because we knit for a hobby, and people traditionally knit because they needed to keep warm or to sell stuff to make money. Those were 2 main reasons. It wasn't really a hobby, although people might have enjoyed it and made beautiful things. So, back to the point of the toes and the socks. I forgot what I was talking about, but I hope it was interesting. Oh yeah, Judy's Magic Cast On. Thank you, Sandra, for mentioning that. Sandra, Judy's Magic Cast On is more challenging to do because you have 2 ends and you're having to twist them, one around one needle, one around the other needle. But what happens when you do that is they get locked in place. So once you're done with that Judy's Magic Cast On part, knitting the first round is really easy. The needles don't fall out. The stitches don't get too big and loose. And, yeah, so Judy's Magic Cast On. And I've put up some videos in the group and in the pattern for the socks. I think I put the links. Judy has her own videos, and Kat Bordy has a video for it. I probably made one too. I don't even remember. But if the inventor of the technique has a video, why not watch hers? Okay, so those are 2 kinds of kind of basic toes that you start right at the tip, and you start increasing. There's another kind that Priscilla has in the book. Let's see if I can find a sock with it. It's called, she calls it a spiral toe, and some of these pictures are hard to see because the socks are made in black or dark colors or lots of colors. So I'm not sure I have one in the book to show you. But I have some socks made with the spiral toe to show you. So this is one that I made. I've made other ones, but I can't put my fingers on them right now. So, see how it's kind of spirally? You can make it in 2 or 4 sections so it can look even more spirally. I use the 2-section one. I've never tried the 4-section one. You cast on there, and then those cast on stitches go kind of diagonally around the shape of the toe, and then you pick up and knit, and that's how you get these new stitches more and more as you go till you have all the stitches you want. So it makes a really neat toe, and you can do it in 2 directions so that they're kind of more anatomically accurate in that one foot, you know, your big toes on one side and one foot is on the other side. So you do those in 2 opposite directions, and it makes a really nice patterning. Now if you do it in 4 sections, it's not as much of a difference in the way it fits. It doesn't make this nice shape that kind of goes along your toes, but it makes a spiral pattern. Then you can have clockwise on one foot and counterclockwise on the other foot. But it's less of a fit issue, I think, on the 4 kind one. So that's what that is. This also has a really interesting heel that I want to show you. And we probably would never make this in the modern socks. I did this pattern for a book because I wanted to show the heel. And so it's toe up, So up, 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 up. And then you can see here it's got kind of a part of the heel where we just knit back and forth. So it's like a heel flap. And then the heel itself is made by gathering in the stitches with a bunch of decreases. So it's quite lumpy. I don't know if you could see how lumpy that is. You can see how it's gathered in. And then after you gather that in to get rid of the stitches, you pick up and you start knitting in the round. And so I made this because it's a really cool technique. And this is supposed to be a slipper sock. It's worsted weight yarn. You couldn't fit it under shoes. I guess you could probably wear it under snow boots, but I wouldn't want to wear them for walking a lot because I think it would irritate the back of your heel. I do have this on a pair that, again, someone gave me. No, I bought these on eBay or Etsy or somewhere. I bought these. I don't know if you can see it because it's so dark. It's black yarn, but it's got gathering in on the heel there. I think you can see that it's a little bit lumpy and not smooth right there. So it's got that same kind of heel. See it? Where it's gathered here. And this is the kind of pattern with the simpler stripes that I used for our beginner sock that we're knitting. This was my inspiration for that pattern, so I wanted to keep it simpler. So this has a plain pointed toe, and then again it's got, this one actually has a drawstring that you can gather in at the top of the leg. So none of these have ribbing. They all have just a drawstring or just cast off when you get done. So those are interesting, aren't they? This is from, not actually from the Middle East where I bought this one from. It was from the Balkans, so somewhere in the former Yugoslavia. I think it came from Sarajevo, this one. I ordered a few pairs of socks from that part of the world. But that's right next to the Middle East. I mean, that part of Europe is right across from Asia. You know, Turkey spans. Part of Istanbul is technically in Europe. Then there's the Bosphorus River, and the other side of the city is technically in Asia. And Greece and Macedonia and the Balkan countries are all right near Turkey. So a lot of overlap of things moving in and out of that. And just like a lot of places in Eastern Europe and the Middle East, the borders move all the time. The borders have been moving forever. So it's not like the United States where a lot of us live, or Canada, or even Western Europe's been pretty much locked in place since World War II. The borders haven't been moving. In the United States, once we had our states, we locked in those borders, you know, 200, 100 years ago. And they haven't been moving, but they're still moving in the Middle East. The borders are in flux. That's what a lot of these problems are about. And that all happened after the Ottoman Empire fell. You probably read about that in House of Stone, and probably is a little bit about it in Arab American also. And then it's just been one problem after another. And this isn't a history lesson, this is a sock lesson, but that's why the patterns, you can't say, oh, this came from this country or this country, unless you know where the item came from, because the patterns, the color work, the techniques were all made by people from all over those areas, and the border of what country changed a lot and still is changing. So I have one more kind of sock I want to show you, and this is also toe up, and this is a Bosnian, what's known as a Bosnian toe and sock, and you can see some similarities and differences to what we were looking at. It's also toe up, a very interesting patterning. A lot of the Middle Eastern and Balkan and sometimes some in Greece, sometimes in Macedonia too, diagonal patterning. There's some overlap. There's more figure and ground. There's not necessarily a background color and a foreground color. So this is a sock I bought from a knitter in Bosnia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Sarajevo, that her granddaughter was selling them for her on Etsy. So I bought a couple pairs from her. So this is one, and I you can see again, it's pretty big. It's got, these colors are all knit all the way around. So you can look inside, you can see that red goes all the way around, even though it's only a few stitches on each row. If I pull it open there, you can see where they trapped the stitches, and you can see the red in there. So very thick, not stretchy, very big. It wouldn't really fit in our fitted shoes. So this is my version that I made for knitting. So this pattern's free on knitting, and it was my adaptation of this. It's not an exact copy, but it shares some similarities. And I made it out of regular sock yarn at a gauge that we would knit at, and the red in this case is duplicate stitch, so it's not knit around and around and around. But the toe on this is interesting. You can see it starts with a rectangle. So you just knit a rectangle, but you don't turn back and forth. You just knit. There's no purls in it. And you kind of drag the yarn across the back of the work, across the wrong side, like an I-cord. And inside the toe, you have these strands of yarn that are where you did that. Then you don't pull it tight like an I-cord because you want it to stay kind of flat like a rectangle. But if you've ever done the swatching where you swatch for knitting in the round on flat needles, and you just draw the yarn across the back and slide the stitches to the other end of the needle, and you knit another right side row, that's what's done on this. And of course you don't have to do it that way, but that's the traditional way. All the ones that I've seen in museums and the ones that I've bought are all made that way. So I make mine that way because I like to do traditional things. So here's a pair that I did for a book a few years ago. I'm going to release it as a single pattern soon. You can see I duplicate stitched the accent color there too, because it was just too much. So this one I just made for a slipper with the short cuff. And I put a crochet edge on and make it like a little ruffle, and it kind of flops all over. But I wanted to show you that because that toe is really interesting. And you can see it maybe a little clearer on this one because there's fewer colors. This is from my Craftsy class, Knit Sock Workshop. See that rectangle? What's cool is after you make the rectangle, when you pick up the stitches and work it, the rectangle is diagonal on the toe. And it kind of forms a point. So it's not the way you think it might be, that you make this rectangle and then it goes straight on the toe. It ends up being diagonal. And see, when I did my Craftsy class, when we had the heels out, I did sock puppet show and Lady Gaga songs. That just reminded me of that. Someone has that footage, but I don't know what they did with it. But anyway, this is the one from my Craftsy class, the pattern. So yeah, so those are Bosnian, and I'm not sure. It's kind of similar to some of those other toes where I said you might knit a little rectangle, but this is always a big rectangle, you know, fairly large. And it's been updated. Like I said, some people knit back and forth. Kelly says, do I wear these? A lot of these are samples from my classes, so I don't want to get them all stinky, and I don't wear them, but yeah, I wear some of them. Some of them I have that I bought and that I made, I use as slippers or as socks, and some I save nice and clean so that when I pass them around in class, I don't feel like I'm passing around my smelly socks. Yeah, and then some of them I don't wear because they're really icky. So this is beautiful, right? This is one I ordered. I ordered it from England, and it was someone from Bosnia that was living in England, and it just looked so pretty. See, also they left they did a solid row where they did the heel opening. Yeah, see that? But it's beautiful, but you can't wear them. You can't wear them. It's that icky acrylic yarn that feels like a plastic bag. I mean, not even Red Heart Super Saver. It's like craft yarn that you would make a shopping bag or something out of. So it's not wearable. Your feet would just sweat and melt into them. But I like the design, and they're pretty. And a lot of times they have little crochet edgings on them. Because crochet and knitting are kind of considered the same craft in a lot of these places. And they're not even always a separate word for it. In Russian, there's no separate word for crochet and knitting. You would say you knit with a hook or you knit with needles. And in the Balkans, in Albania and Serbia, places like that, that I've read, someone sent me a DVD of socks and gloves and things from a museum in the Balkans, and I had to Google translate it and everything. But there's a story on there about crochet and knitting and also nail bending, because crochet, Bosnian crochet, is a kind of slip stitch crochet. It's done with one hook or one needle, and nail bending was done with one needle. Nail bending, if you haven't heard of it, it's like a precursor to knitting and crochet, but you use strings of yarn that you cut, you put them on like a big tapestry needle, and you loop and make stitches. Some of them look very much like knitted stitches that usually are twisted. I don't know if you can see on this, I don't know if you can see it, but a lot of this part of the world, everything's knit with twisted stitches on purpose. It makes the fabric stronger and tighter. And the nail bending stitches look like twisted knit stitches. Or there are some other kind of nail bending that I've seen that looks like crochet stitches. Yeah, so Susan says tejer is to knit or to crochet in Mexico. So you say with a hook or with needles. So here, though, they have a different way to talk about it. They have men's knitting and women's knitting. And men's knitting is with one needle. And women's knitting is with 5 needles, when they would use double points to knit a sock in the round. And there's another saying that's related to that that says it's a poor man who has a wife who needs 5 needles to knit, because nail bending was harder to do. And if you had to use the 5 needles to do what we would consider real knitting, it meant you were less skilled with the needle. So just some stories that I've seen from that part of the world. In Lithuanian, just because I know about that, there is a separate word for crochet, but when you say knitting, it can include crochet, and people will say that they knit with needles or knit with a hook, or they might say, I knit with needles, I'm knitting socks with needles, or crocheting socks with a hook. They'll clarify, even though there is a different word. And there's a whole bunch of books called mezgimas, which means knitting, and not very creative. The name of 4 or 5 books that I've seen so far, mezgimas. And the most popular one, that's like the Vogue Knitting Encyclopedia of Lithuania, that came out in the 50s or 60s, I think. I have a copy of it. The cover of the book, called Mezgimas, which we would think of means knitting, has a picture of crochet on the cover. So really obvious that both are considered the same thing. So those are just some of a lot of the samples I have that I wanted to show you with those different toe-up toes. All of these have afterthought heels. All of these samples I have, except for that one that has that cupped heel that's gathered, they're all made with afterthought heels. There are other heels that are used, but I haven't seen them on samples that I've seen in museums or anything. The only one I've seen is this. This is a replica that I made of a sock from the Gobi Desert, which is China and Mongolia. So not even where we think of knitting coming from. Linda Ligon from Interweave had picked up this sock when she was there for something, and they asked me at Piecework to reproduce it. And actually, I thought it was toe up at first, but it turned out to be cuff down and had a short row heel. So we can do a short row heel and a short row toe in toe up socks. So this one ended up being cuff down. But you can do, here's one from my Craftsy class and I did the short row heel, short row toe. And you can use that same technique on cuff down or toe up socks. So I just wanted to say, pretty much, if you do something like this, where the heel and toe are a different color or a solid color, you can put any heel or any toe on any traditionally made sock. I don't want to say on any sock, because there's some really creative people out there now that have invented some bizarro ways to make socks that are really fun to play with and to make, but they're not traditional in the way that they don't have a heel that you can just put a different heel in, or a toe that you put a different toe in. But if you find these traditional socks, you can substitute, and basically you put a toe and you put the foot, you put a heel, you put the leg, and that's the sock. And you know, they're pretty much interchangeable. So that's what I wanted to show you on the socks. And there's a lot more detail in here. There's some that I haven't explored yet that I want to learn more about. And you know, if I had $1 million, I would go to every country in the Middle East and Eastern Europe, and I would do a couple books about the knitting in those countries. And I don't know if that'll happen. Maybe one of them will happen before I die. I don't think both will. I just wanted to show you one other thing before we go, which is another book that is also old and out of print. Might be in print and paperback. It's called Fancy Feet. It's by Anna Zilborg. It has a different title in paperback, but it's the same book. These are all socks from Turkey. But you'll notice, if you look through it, some very similar things to some of the socks that we looked at. Here's one with that flat toe. And the pattern that has verticals. Just like that red and white and blue one I showed you, has some verticals and some horizontal stripings. You'll find some with the all over pattern on the foot, and or on the whole leg. The colors change, but it's an all over pattern. And so a lot of these Anna Zilborg made, and then there's a few mixed in that I'm sure she didn't. And some she says, and some I'm not sure if she says, but they look like museum samples that she just figured out how to make. So that's one of those. And look, it has that little tassel on the toe. Like I told you, sometimes they have the little tassel on the toe. They don't weave in the ends. And because people in the Middle East and in Southern Europe generally didn't wear the same kind of shoes that Northern Europeans wore. They might have worn leather sandals that you know, had a sole and then were strapped on, or maybe they didn't even have what we would consider a sole. It was just a leather on the bottom of the foot and then straps that you would tie on to hold it on, or loose boots that they might wear in the winter. And so they didn't need everything to be so slim and fitting on the foot. And that's why there is a difference in the way those socks are that you see if you look in museum collections. Or I'll share a link with you because I have a whole bunch of pictures saved in a Pinterest board. I'll post it in the group, because socks from Iran and Turkey and Albania and all those places, I have a whole bunch of them pinned in there. Some of them are amazing. Some of them are 20 stitches or more to the inch. If you try to figure out, you know, how could I knit a sock with that pattern, you'd have to have that many stitches to make it fit on your foot. It's really crazy. Also, you know, all those colors. So I don't know if you've heard of Portuguese knitting or Andean knitting, where the knitter would have the yarn here. Let me show you. I don't have anything cast on, but you know, we usually just wrap the yarn around some fingers and the yarn just lays there and we knit. But in Portugal and in South America, and also in Greece, Macedonia, Albania, Bulgaria, Turkey, and the Middle East, people knit in a different way. And they will put the yarn on the, I'm trying to think of you, what's the left, what's the right? This is my left side of my body. Put the yarn around the neck, And then take the knitting needles and have the yarn, and they'll be knitting with their left thumb, usually. And the right thumb is, or maybe with the right thumb. Anyway, you're knitting with the thumbs. One thumb's used to hold the unused colors out of the way, and the other thumb's used to flick the stitch around the needle. If you're knitting stockinette stitch, you knit on the inside of the tube, all purling, because you're knitting on the inside. And you can have 10 colors and they won't get tangled or anything. So that's why you'll find a lot of these places where they do that, that they're not afraid the way we are of having all the different colors in one round. So I'm just going to wrap up with that. I tried to teach this as a class a couple times in the Bosnian Toe sock class that I teach. And it turns out to be a novelty. It's a really cool technique, and if you really learned it, and when I learned it, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to use this for all my color work from now on. It's so cool. And then I made like one little change purse, and I never used the technique again. And that happens to a lot of people, so I don't bother teaching it anymore because it turns out to be more of a novelty than a useful skill for us. It just doesn't, I don't know, for some reason it just doesn't fit into the way we do things. It is really cool though. There are a couple people that teach it. You can find, Interweave might even have a DVD for the Andean, and then definitely the Portuguese way of knitting. Andrea Wong has a book, and I think also a DVD with Interweave, or I think it's a DVD with Interweave. I don't think she has an online class. I'm not sure, but you could look that up. And the Portuguese way of knitting, it's the same thing, except that instead of putting the yarn around the neck, they usually put a pin here, and they'll put the yarn up and run it through the pin for the tension instead of going around the neck, so you don't get rope burn on the back of your neck from all those yarn strands. So someone said, can you show the book again? This is Anna Zilberg's book, Fancy Feet, the Turkey one. I forgot the paperback name, but Anna Zilberg. If you see a book about Turkish socks by her, that's paperback and has a different title, it's the same book. And then the one that we were reading that has all the different kind of techniques for toe-up socks is Ethnic Socks and Stockings by Priscilla Gibson Roberts. You know, I think a lot of libraries have this. This is, you know, if you want to know about toe-up socks and Eastern socks and techniques, this is the book that has all of that information in it. It's the only thing in English that has a compendium of those techniques. Now, if you want to know about cuff-down socks and all the techniques, even though that's not our topic this month, Nancy Bush's Folk Socks is the best compendium of techniques. She's got a whole section in there that has all different kinds of heels and all different kinds of toes that were done traditionally around the world. There's a lot of books that have all different kinds of heels and all different kinds of toes and techniques for cuff down and toe up socks, but this one for toe up Eastern traditional socks, and Nancy Bush's Folk Socks for the cuff down, for having like an encyclopedia of the techniques. If you have those two books, that's like a PhD in traditional sock, heel, and toe techniques. And it's really useful. And that's where I've learned most of the stuff that I know about these traditional kind of sock knitting techniques. So, okay, I am going to go now. I'm getting hot. My cats are running around. I showed you all the socks that I have, but this was fun. I hope you guys had a lot of fun too, and I hope some other people will get to watch this recorded. And I think we'll do this regularly. It's we can do it to talk about the books. We can do it to talk about like a Q&A on the socks next week or the week after. So if you're working on the socks and you have a question, I know it's not really a knit along. So we have some people that are finished and some people that are just getting started. But I think it's fun. So what we'll do is, when I'm going to do the Facebook Live, I'll post like I did today. Facebook Live tonight at 8 p.m. or sometimes I'll do it on the weekend because I know people have different work schedules, so I might do it. Facebook Live Saturday afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern or whatever. And then you can put your questions in that announcement. And then I can look at them before I get ready to do the video, and I maybe even print them out. And so like at the end of our talk, I can answer the questions that you put, because it's really hard for me to keep up with the questions that are scrolling by as I'm talking, just trying to look at the socks, look at the books, talk to you, and all of that. So if you could ask questions in advance, then we can do that. So I'm not sure if we'll do it every week or every other week, but if you don't mind looking at me like this, and I didn't brush my hair today, and I am just wearing slobby clothes, if you don't mind that, then I don't mind doing it, because I have fun doing it. But what stops me is thinking that, oh, I have to blow dry my hair or put on makeup or something. Because I'll never get around to that. The only reason I do it craftsy is because they make you and they do it to you. So, okay. So glad you enjoyed it. Those of you that have put a little comments on there and some of the differences in that, and now you'll recognize them on here. And I will see you online. Before I go to bed tonight, I'll post that link to my Pinterest board. And I'll talk to you in the group, and that's it. Good night. Thank you for joining me.